My name is Emma. Ever since I left high school, I have focused all my energy on work. I decided to drop out because I had something important I wanted to do. Even though my parents were worried, they supported my choice. I believe I am where I am today because of their help. Recently, my parents, who I am very thankful for, told me they were thinking about selling our family home. This house used to belong to my grandparents. It has been updated over the years, but it is getting old and showing signs of wear. Since my parents are getting older, they want to move to a more accessible apartment and tear down our family home. I realized that our old house is quite old, so I suggested we all live together. I might get married someday, so we won't be able to live together forever. But I wanted to give back to my parents for all their support when I was younger. So my parents and I moved into a new apartment. We now have more rooms than in our old house, and since we live on a high floor, my parents love the great view. We even have a hobby room. One day, while I was happily living with my parents, I got a call from my younger sister, Jane. We haven't gotten along for a long time because she feels embarrassed by me. She was really angry when I dropped out of high school. She said, "Why did you quit? I don't want my friends to know that my sister dropped out. It's so embarrassing. From now on, let's pretend we don't know each other." Even though Jane and I went to different high schools, my dropping out was something she was ashamed of. Jane works very hard and went to a better school than I did, so she has always looked down on me. She often says, "Emma is stupid," and made fun of me, saying I wouldn't succeed. I was tired of hearing her say I was causing trouble for our parents and that I should just leave. As soon as I started making money from part-time jobs after dropping out, I decided to move out. 10 years have passed since I moved out, and Jane has also left home. We haven't communicated in a long time. After starting college and living alone, Jane seems to have stopped talking to our parents too. When our parents decided to tear down our family home, they consulted both Jane and me. Jane simply said, "I don't care about that old house. Do whatever you want." My parents were puzzled by her reaction. One day, my parents were surprised to receive a call from Jane. According to my mom, who answered the phone, Jane had gotten married without telling them. "Oh, you decided to live in a condo, right? Come visit with your husband sometime," my mom said. Jane casually shrugged and said, "Didn't I mention it?" She also revealed that she wasn't planning to have a wedding ceremony, which surprised my parents. Jane had always dreamed of having a beautiful wedding and the perfect dress, so it was strange for her to skip the ceremony. I wondered if her husband didn't have much money, but Jane said he worked at the same well-known company as her. If he worked at such a good place, he should have enough money, which made it even more confusing. Finally, the day came when Jane visited our parents' house with her husband, Scott. He was a young man with an expensive watch and seemed polite, but he avoided making eye contact. As Jane explored her childhood home, she exclaimed, "Wow, what a big and clean room. The view is amazing." Scott commented on how great the place was, saying your parents did a good job. When my mom smiled and thanked me for the new apartment, Jane made a mean face and said, "Really? You have an older sister? I didn't notice." She then mocked me, saying to Scott, "Can you believe this ugly woman is my sister? This is the Emma you've heard about." I was shocked and speechless. My mom scolded Jane for being rude, but Jane didn't care. She continued, "My sister didn't even graduate high school. There's a big difference between us since we both graduated from a state university." I was surprised to hear Jane say that. I dropped out of high school to focus on becoming a comic book artist, but I understood why Jane might feel embarrassed. She and Scott laughed together and opened the door to my room. Jane looked around and said, "What's with all these comic books? It's creepy. Are you still into that nerdy stuff?" My walls were covered with comic books because of my passion for them. Jane has always looked down on subcultures like mine, while I tend to be more introverted. We just don't understand each other. I don't understand why Jane puts on so much mascara. I'm a comic book artist, and these are my references. You're probably not even a successful comic book artist, are you? You're still living off mom and dad. It's embarrassing. Just get out already, Jane said. Confused by her words, I instinctively replied, "What?" "Scott and I are going to live in this house from now on," she declared. "What? I haven't heard anything about this," both mom and dad exclaimed in surprise. Ignoring their shock, Jane laughed. "Scott and I will take care of mom and dad. You're no longer needed, so just get out." "Aren't you embarrassed to still be living off them?" Not only are you ugly, but you're also stupid. Scott chuckled at her words, trying to hold back his anger. I was furious too. Jane and Scott's attitude had upset my parents, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Fine, I'll move out in a few days, and you and Scott can live here. But remember, I'm not giving you any money. Sure. Bye, sis. Please move out as soon as you can, Jane said, feeling triumphant. After they left, my parents told me I didn't have to move out, but I was determined to get back at Jane and Scott. No, I'm moving out. I have a place to go, I replied. I moved out quickly, and soon Jane and Scott moved into our family home. On the day of their move, Jane called me and asked, "Have you moved out yet?" I replied, exasperated, "I'm on my way out now, so don't worry." Jane always acts politely to our parents, but she often puts me down. To both our parents, Jane and I are their beloved daughters. But when they told her it hurts to hear her badmouth me, Jane didn't seem to care. A month later, just as I expected, I got a call from Jane. When I answered, I thought, here it comes. With tears in her voice, she said, "Emma, the property management company called me. They said they haven't received the rent. If I don't pay soon, they'll kick me out." "Why would I pay the rent? I don't live there anymore, do I?" "Mom and Dad told me you were paying the rent to show your gratitude to them." "Why did you stop?" I replied, "As I said, I don't live there, so I'm not obligated to pay the rent." "Just bring the money right now. The utility bills are really high," Jane insisted. Feeling disgusted with her constant demands, I hung up and called my boyfriend Liam. Jane just asked me to come over. "I'm going to her parents' house," I said. "I'll come with you. I'm worried about you, Emma, and I haven't seen your parents in a while," he responded. After I left my parents' house, I had a place to stay because Liam offered me a room as we were considering marriage. This past month had been a good time for us to figure things out together. When we arrived at my parents' house and opened the door, Jane stormed in, clearly angry. "Did you bring the money? You need to pay the rent to show gratitude to our parents." "Do you think I'm a struggling cartoonist? How can I afford rent for such a nice apartment?" I shot back. "Well, I don't know, but you were able to pay before, right?" "Please pay the rent and utility bills," Jane pressed. "I won't. You and Scott both work for good companies, right? Why can't you pay your own rent?" Jane was at a loss for words. I noticed she might not have the money. She was dressed in designer clothes from head to toe, and Scott, who was also in fancy attire, had a luxury watch on his wrist. "Isn't it that you and Scott can't pay the rent, not that you won't?" I asked. "You said you wanted to take care of Mom and Dad, but I heard you've left all the housework to them. Aren't you and Scott just living off Mom and Dad?" Jane looked hurt and bit her lip. Scott, who had been avoiding eye contact with me and only looking at Liam, raised his voice nervously. Why is Liam here?" "Liam?" Jane seemed surprised. While Jane acted unfazed, Liam, who had been watching the sisters argue with concern, smiled and introduced himself. "Ah, hello there. I see you already know I'm dating Emma and plan to marry her," Liam said. "What? Emma and Liam are dating? Who is this Liam guy?" Scott asked, clearly upset. "Don't you know? He's a voice actor from an anime that made a big splash. You've seen him on TV," Jane said, not really paying attention to the conversation. "What? Why is my sister dating someone like him?" Scott exclaimed. "It's because Emma is the one who created the original story for that popular anime," Liam explained gently. Jane's face turned to shock. I had actually published a series in a boys' magazine, and it had become so popular that everyone was talking about it. Even Jane, who didn't know much about comics, recognized the title and looked pale, as if she regretted all the time she had underestimated me now that she realized I was successful. I sighed at Jane's sudden change in attitude and said to her and Scott, "If you can't pay rent, then leave right now. I'll expect the 1 month's rent from you later." "Don't say that. Scott and we got into gambling and lost a lot of money," Jane said, looking nervous. I was shocked to learn that they had become addicted to slot machines and lost a big chunk of their money. They had moved back home to live with our parents because they couldn't afford to live on their own. They had even borrowed money from shady places, and most of their salaries were going toward paying off that debt. "I have no intention of helping you, Jane, especially since you've always mocked me. Our parents are moving again, so you and Scott should leave right away." "Why are Mom and Dad moving?" Jane asked. Because I can imagine you causing trouble for them with your debts. If you don't leave quickly, I'll charge you for a second month's rent too, I said firmly. Jane and Scott reluctantly agreed to leave, and the meeting ended. Later, my parents found out what happened and called Liam to apologize, but Liam didn't seem bothered by it. It might be best to avoid seeing Jane for a while, he suggested, and he helped me find a new place for my parents to move. I quickly bought a new apartment and my parents prepared to move again. I'm sorry for the trouble, my parents said. It's only natural to repay you both for supporting me when I made the tough decision to drop out of high school, I replied. I am who I am today because of you. My parents were moved to tears by this. Jane and Scott seemed to be struggling with their debts even after everything. But I didn't feel I had to help them, so I demanded full payment for the rent and utilities I had paid for them. Jane and Scott didn't pay me back and stopped answering their phones. So I decided to call their workplace directly to get my money. This made everyone at their company aware of their debt situation. It turned out that Jane and Scott couldn't quit their jobs because they needed the money, and they were uncomfortable working there. After that, I married Liam. Our parents gave us their blessing, and we've been living a happy life. Even though I've cut ties with Jane and Scott as my blood relatives, I still wish for them to be strong and live well.